to the benefit. And then we introduce them into the country and let them do their thing. And of course, if you don't know a lot about biological control, and you don't know about the classic case that happened in 1880, when the cottony cushion scale was devastating citrus in California, and Charles Valentine Riley, an entomologist, and his assistant Albert Coley, they found out that the insect was from Australia, so they went to Australia, and Albert brought back two biologically beneficial insects. One was a beetle, one of the parasitoids. The beetle was called the Vidalia beetle. And that Vidalia beetle was released, and that saved the California citrus industry. Has anybody heard about that story? It's a classic case of biocontrol, classical biocontrol. And that is still being done today. It's being done with emerald ash borer. It's being done with numerous pests that we deal with to go to the country of origin. And it's very regular for some of these beneficials they bring back are in captivity for 10 years. You just can't bring them back because they might attack on more indigenous species.
If you can stay kind of close to the computer, that people online can hear you better.
Okay, so yeah, that's
Thanks.
probably a good idea.
Are you taking questions throughout, did you say, or do you want to hold them?
Why don't we wait till the end?
Okay.
That way it doesn't disrupt the flow. But
Got
yeah, and you can write them down. Yeah, but that'll be the way. So this is what we're gonna talk about. And of course, basically we start off with the gardens. So landscapes and gardens are ecosystems, and they contain a wide diversity of interactions related to insects, both good and bad. Okay. Oh, we have handouts here, but you can pick them after. Yeah, this is a good crowd, Steve. So so I'm going to be focusing on in the gardens, whether it be a home or whatever. So these are ecosystems, and there's a lot of interactions that occur between the good and bad insects. So this is a couple of publications that I liked enough to talk about. One was Increasing Beneficial Insects in Row Crops and Gardens. And it talks about the different biologicals, and we'll get into that. The other one is called Beneficial Insects from Oklahoma State University. And basically, they're very similar in what they present. They talk about, okay, what are the beneficial insects and mites in the garden? How can you promote them? How can you enhance their longevity? And how can you not disrupt them? Okay. So those are the publications that I brought for everybody. So let's talk about beneficial insects. There are basically four groups. The first one is consumers. What would be considered a consuming beneficial insect? Ants. Ants. Ants are consumers. Actually, termites would be too, but they're not beneficial. Pollinators, you know, bees. Honeybees, bumblebees are native solitary bees. Decomposers, that includes earwigs, cell bugs, ants. These are things that break plant material down to utilize in the garden. The last one is the one that gets a lot of attention to talk about. We call them natural enemies. And again, the two groups are parasitoids, also referred to as parasitic wasps, and the predators. Okay. So there's lots of information. These are just posters, meet the beneficials. Lots of them out there. We'll talk about some. The good bugs, beneficials. There's some problems here. Nematodes are not bugs. But this is the type of information that you get if you go to like a garden center or you get online. Some of these companies that present a lot of this information. So the beneficial insects, again, the classifications are the types of the parasitoids, refer to parasitic wasp, and the predators. Okay, let's get into detail in each one of all of these. So a parasitoid on the left, attacking an aphid and a predator. This is a predator called the mealybug destroyer. Some of these have really good names. Cryptolemus montroseri. This is a predator of mealybugs. This is one that we use in conservatories quite a bit, or in terrascapes, because you can't really spray in these environments. You have to use pretty much almost 100% biological control agents. So parasitoids, one of the issues is that parasitoids make up over 70% of the beneficial insects out there. The issue is they're not very visible. They're very small. In fact, trichogramma, we talk about, is an egg parasitoid. How many remember what a pencil looks like? If you sharpened a pencil, the tip of that is the size of trichogram. Okay, so we have reconded wasp, ichneumonitor wasp. These are ones that you might see flying around with a long ovipositor. A lot of these would attack wood-boring insects in trees. Chalcid wasp, trichogramma, and Aphidius species. So most of the beneficial insects that are out there, over about 70% are parasitoids. Okay, but they're extremely small, as I'll show you. Okay, so how does this work? In the insect world, the females dominate. Sorry about that, guys, because they're the ones responsible for reproduction. So here we have a female, and what she's doing is looking for aphids to lay her eggs. Okay. Now each parasitoid can lay up to 200 eggs, and she lays individual eggs into each aphid. Okay. So once she finds a quality host, and she's very picky. She wants a host that will allow her progeny, her offspring, to survive and come out in the next generation. So what she does is, okay, so she will go ahead and insert her ovipositor and lay an egg inside an aphid. Now the aphid doesn't know what's happening, and the aphid doesn't die right away, which is unlike predators. But over a period of time, the larva emerges from the egg and starts eating the internal contents of the aphid. So eventually the aphid gets sluggish and then dies. Okay, and we'll talk about the time period. So that's what's going on there. So again, the female, she takes her ovipositor and sits into an aphid. After about 10 days, the aphid turns into a brown mummified dead aphid. And the reason is because as the larva is inside the aphid, it's consuming the tissues, it's giving off gases. And the fancy term for that is farting, basically. And the gases, because they can't hold it, cause the aphid to inflate, and then it dries down and it dies. And then later on, the larva pupates inside the aphid and then becomes an adult. And the adult has chewing mouth parts, and they typically chew an opening at the very end of the abdomen of the aphid, and they emerge. So you can see, look at this. Every aphid has been parasitized. That's what you want to see. This cycle from the time period that the female lays an egg inside an aphid until emergence is about 10 days to 14 days. Okay, and that's going to vary depending on the age of the aphid, the quality, things like that, and also temperatures. But it's about 10 to 14 days from egg laying to emergence. Now, this is beautiful, but the issue is this. Does anybody know, if you have this in a garden center or a nursery, and somebody not familiar sees that, you think they're going to buy the plant? What we found, most cases, they do not, because they don't know what those are, and to them, any bug is a bad bug. So this is where there's a little bit of, biological control. You're not using pesticides, but the consumer still doesn't want bugs. So what we do is we promote education. We basically have signs that we have, and we've used these in nurseries and garden centers and other places. Signs saying we do not use pesticides, we use biologicals, and they show pictures of that. So the customers know that what they're getting are dead aphids. They're not live, and they're not going to attack their other plants. Okay. So another way to think about this is, here's a close-up. So these are aphids, but they are the adult parasitoids, and see they're small. They're about 2 millimeters length. So that's why they're not seen as much as predators are, but they are the ones that dominate the biological control. And you can see this is actually in a nursery we worked at, garden center down by Leroy, Arnold's greenhouse. If you've been down there, really famous place. George and Rita, I've worked with them for many years now. Andrew Fox owns it. But this is on the leaf underside, and that's what you want to see. That is 100% parasitization. Again, you have to educate the consumers to tell them those are dead aphids, because they're not going to recognize it. They're not educated enough, which is fine. That's our job, is education. Okay, but that's beautiful. That is beautiful to see all those dead aphids there. And so here's another. How many have seen this? Oh, this is off. This is awesome. Do you know how this works? So basically, this is a tobacco hornworm because it's got a red horn, and these are cocoons where the adults are going to emerge. Well, let's step backward and see how this works. So this is Catesia congregata. Catesia congregata is a parasite. It's laying an egg into a young stage of the caterpillar. Well, when the caterpillar goes through several instars, those are stages between each molt, it gets bigger. That egg undergoes, we call multiple division, which we know in biology is called what? Meiosis. Meiosis, if you remember your biology, is multiple. That one egg divides into maybe 50 to 100 individuals. So what the larva and once they emerge from those eggs, they eat the internal and there's a great video on this. It's like it's a great science fiction movie too. So they eat the inside and eventually they come out. You can see these holes, areas, and those are the pupal stages where the adults are going to come out. So one egg, you can get 50 to 100 individuals. The fancy term for that is called polyembryony. Polyembryony means multiple meiosis, multiple divisions. So this is really cool to see. I have a Riker mount up there. You can look at it where I have the caterpillar before, and then if I can move around just a bit, I'll pass it around. So when you look at this is the caterpillar, not attacked. This is the caterpillar with the cocoons, and they're the parasitoids that emerge from it. So that's what that is. Okay, that's great. Okay, that's what you want to see. Kids love this. So another aspect, basically, it is here's another one. This is the imported cabbage worm, and this is really, look at that. A larva is actually pouring out of the caterpillar. Oh, this is an awesome science fiction movie. So there is the caterpillar. That's the larva inside. Those are all cocoons that came off of that imported cabbage worm. That's what you want to see. Okay, basically the same concept. Okay. Has anybody seen that? This is from the community garden in Manhattan. I visit both of them because I helped Chuck Marr figure out what's going on. But that's what you want to see. Those are dead. It's going to die. It's going to die. But it's serving as a source for multiple parasitoids. Okay. Is that correct or not? Okay. So here is another example of that. On the left are the cocoons. And on the right are the parasitoids that emerge from it. Okay. So one way to look at this is Hollywood. How many remember these two movies? If you think of parasitoids, remember John Hurt? He had that thing stuck to his face. It laid an egg in his body, and it came out when he had dinner. That's an example of a parasitoid. And the same thing in Aliens too. These things. So I don't much care for Hollywood movies, but this is one example that they help entomology. Okay. You can actually buy trichogramma. I'll pass this around too. This is a container that Blueville sells, one of our nurseries, and you buy this from a company called Orchid. Now, once you buy them, then they send you the trichogramma. Remember, trichogramma is an egg parasitoid for various caterpillars. And that's all, it's what we call a specialist parasitoid. Okay. There are specialists that only attack like one life stage or one type of insect, and there are those that attack multiple, we call generalists. Most parasitoids are specialists. They'll only attack one life stage. It could be the egg, pupa, nymph, larva, adult, or they'll basically attack only one group of insects. In this case, trichogramma only attacks caterpillars, where predators are very generalists. If we talk about that, safe and effective. I would say safe, effective. That's another issue. Okay. Okay, let's talk about predators. There are lots of them, but we can get them into groups. So we have beetles, which includes ladybird beetles, roe beetles, ground beetles, soldier beetles, and then the true bugs. These are the ones in the group called Hemiptera. Ambush bugs, assassin bugs, big-eyed bugs, damsel bugs, minute or pirate flower bugs, orris, and predatory stink bugs. There are some predatory stink bugs out there. Flies. rubber flies, surface hoverflies, and tachinid flies, and then lacewings, green and brown lacewings, and then others. And that includes praying mantids, predatory mites, and spiders. Okay, so those are the groupings for the predators. Okay, so let's go through those slowly. Ground beetles. Ground beetle adults are voracious predators of caterpillars. The larvae reside in the soil, but the adults come out and feed. Okay, they feed on a wide variety, which means they're generalists, but primarily caterpillars. They actually will crawl up a plant, grab them, bring them back down, and just tear them to shreds. It looks like a war zone by the time they're done. But ground beetles are extremely beneficial, and we want to encourage them in the garden. Ladybird beetles, on the left is the adults, on the right is the larvae. In this case, both the adults and the larvae feed primarily on aphids. That's their primary. They will feed on some whiteflies and other soft-bodied insects, but they really prefer aphids, feeding on plants. Okay. By the way, these are close-ups, not life-size, so there's not a 1.5 foot, immature ladybird beetle. So don't get too excited about that. You can buy it, but we don't recommend it. Anybody know why? You probably heard. What's that, Steve?
Fly away.
Yeah, but let's understand. Let's talk about why they fly. I'm from California, which has several new names now, but in California, the ladybird beetles, they overwinter in the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas. And so what these companies do is they collect them from those areas and they put them in packages. And these are just two different ways of packaging. Well, when you release them, they still think it's winter. And so they go flying away somewhere. And so what you release in your yard, your neighbors are getting, and maybe your neighbors beyond that, basically overall. The other problem about ladybird beetles is they need a lot of aphids to really stay within an area. And what I mean a lot is the aphid numbers are such that plant damage is going to occur. They are really, we don't recommend buying them for number one. It's just, if you have ladybird beetles in your yard, just try to keep them around the best you can. Okay, but do not buy them. The other problem is that some of these ladybird beetles carry diseases. And if you release them, then that disease, whether it be a fungus or bacteria, can get in the existing populations and cause the natural ones to collapse. So that's another reason why not to buy them. Okay. Good. So I brought examples. This is the one that I have up there. And I was telling the people at the garden center, it's really not right to sell those. And they kind of escorted me out the store. So they didn't really want me in the area, but that's something else to talk about. So ladybird beetle adults are part of the ecosystem. But really overall, they're not going to manage an aphid population, which I'll show you. Okay, it's too out of hand. Okay, so green lacewings. Green lacewings on the left is the adult. They do not feed on the insects. They feed on pollen and nectar, but they lay the eggs for the next generation. The larvae are voracious feeders on aphids. What they will do is they will grab an aphid, lift it up, and then squeeze it. And they have grooves in their jaws, and the aphid juice flows in, so they get what they call bug juice. And they just throw the aphids away and go after another one. That's how they do it. I mean, insects are so cool. When you talk about biologicals, it's really amazing. In fact, they will eat each other. They're very cannibalistic. Okay, if they can't find a food source, they'll eat each other. That younger brother, you have to think about that sometimes. Yeah, that's another issue. So, and then there's a brown lacewing in the same scenario. The adults do not feed on aphids, it's the larval feeding them. They're the eggs. And the reason they're on stalks is because of the cannibalism. If they were all laid on the leaf, they would emerge and eat each other. And you'd have one big fat green lacewing that won't eat for a month. So when they emerge, they crawl down the stalk and they start looking for aphids. So that's why through evolution, they are laid on stalks. So you minimize cannibalism. Okay. Amazing, isn't it? Oh, it's amazing. Insects. I love it. It's like hover or serpent fly. So in this case, the larva is a maggot. It feeds on aphids also. The adult does not. But just like the green lacewing, it requires pollen and nectar. And remember that is, we talk about conservation biocontrol, that's critical to sustain itself, but also for egg production. Okay. They look like bees, but they're in the order Diptera. Diptera hymenoptera bees. They only have one set of wings. You can grab them, they won't sting you. They look like bees, but they're only feeding on pollen and nectar. The larvae, the maggots, they will grab an aphid by the butt, lift it up, and then they suck the guts out of it. And you can see the dead cadavers all over the place. So again, this is an example where the larval stage is predaceous, but not the adult. Okay. Wheel bugs. How many have seen wheel bugs? Yeah, this is a really, so this is the nymphal stage of the wheel bug, but this is what's interesting. There is the mouth parts. And anybody put my wheel bug? It hurts, doesn't it? Yes, because that is a very thick mouth part, and especially if it gets under your fingernails or skin, it can be an immensely painful bite. Okay, so there's the nymphs. And these are, so I have to apologize. When insects are having sex, you can take great pictures because they're not moving very fast. So this is a male, female, they're mating, and this is a wheel bug. And the reason they're called wheel bugs is because they have that like stegosaurus, the stegosaurus dinosaur look, where they have that wheel on their back. And this is the wheel bug just about ready to attack a tomato hornworm. Okay. And what they'll do is they'll take their mouth parts, insert it into the hornworm, and then start sucking the guts out. Sometimes they inject a saliva toxin to make it easier, but they're really interesting predators, and I'm going to develop an extension fact sheet on them in the future. But again, don't handle them with your fingers, because if you get bit, it's going to. And then praying mantids. I always ask this question and ask the gardeners: are praying mantids good or bad, and what do they eat? What would you classify them as? Or would you classify them as a generalist? They eat everything. The answer is yes. They eat everything. Crickets, hummingbirds, little kids, things like that. And they eat whatever they can get in those rasping, they're very slow moving. They wait usually for their host. I've seen them eat like monarch butterflies, which is something you don't want to see. But really they're Jones predators. Okay. So we have two species in Kansas, the Carolina and the Chinese mantid available. This is probably the Chinese mantid. And I have some Riker mounts there. There's the egg case. This is the egg case of the Chinese mantid. And I'll have a Riker mount. Some Riker ones here to show. These are some micro mounts. So in this one, this is the Chinese mantid. The one down below here is the Carolina mantid. They have different looking egg cases. Out of that egg case will emerge about 200 nymphs. And if you've never seen it happen, I was sent 2 egg cases, and lo and behold, they emerged in my lab. I was able to trap them before they get, but here's an example of 2 egg cases and the nymphs that came out of it. Okay. So you don't want to leave this in your home unless you want lots of little nymphal stages of praying mantids flying. So this is on like trees. You'll see this in the wintertime. That's how they overwinter in the egg case. You can buy them, but we don't recommend them. Praying mantids are not going to manage an insect or mite pest population. They just don't eat enough individuals to have an impact. And I have that container over there. But you can see right here, there are the nymphs that came out of that one container, about 200 nymphs per egg case. Okay. So what we recommend is just whatever you got in your garden, just keep it around. And they will be around as long as there's a food source. But as long as that food source is gone, they move somewhere else, just like the ladybird. Okay. Here is an extension publication. Did everybody get a copy? If you don't, I have extension publication on praying mantids, so 2 years ago, basically overall. And this is an image I took when they were eating a moth in my yard. And then there is the egg case of the Carolina, of the Chinese, and there is the Carolina. Okay. If you didn't pick one up, you can pick one up at the end of the presentation. Wasps are predators too. People get fearful about mud dabbers, paper wasps, bald-faced hornets, but they are predators. They will attack caterpillars. This is a Polypsis species, and they basically what they do is they grab caterpillars, bring them back to their nest, and that's what the offspring are going to feed upon. Okay, so actually they are considered, in a direct sense, predators because of doing it. Okay? Most of them are docile. The only aggressive wasp is the yellow jacket. That's the one that will attack you and can multiple sting because their stinger is not it's sharpened. It's not barbed, so they can sting you multiple times. Whereas all other wasps, like bees, honeybees, once they sting you, they're dead because the stinger stays in your skin and they basically die after that. Okay, so wasps are considered actual predators. There are lots of these we call predatory mites. Now, again, these are ones that are out there, but they're mostly used in greenhouse production systems. And this is where I do a lot of work with greenhouse producers. You can buy these from a company. Here's an example of Phytoceras persimilis. This is the one we use for two-spotted spider mite. It is probably the best predator for two-spotted spider mite. You order them from a company, and they ship you them in these containers, and then you release them in the greenhouse among the crop. I'll just pass this around. Okay, so these are out there in the environment, but their impact is not as well known or in more of an influence than what we've already talked about. Okay, but just be aware there are predatory mites out there in the environment, the ecosystem. Okay. These are actually reared in laboratories. And then when you order them, they go ahead, harvest what they have, and they ship them to you in those types of containers. That's one formulation, and there are others that are commercially available.
You haven't said not to order those. Are those worth ordering?
Okay, if you're in a greenhouse scenario, yes. Outdoors, don't do it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question. This is all in their controlled environmental conditions in greenhouses, in terrascapes, or conservatories. Spiders. Are spiders effective predators? Well, here's a publication, spiders as biological control agents. Really, the answer is no. And the reason for that is because spiders have such a low metabolism. They're almost an example of the living dead. They can take a month to eat a food source. That's not going to manage pest populations. Okay. They are good to have in the environment, especially multiple types like wolf and ambush and crab spiders, because they are predators, but they're not going to manage an aphid population or a bagworm population, whatever. They just don't eat enough to impact the numbers. It's a numbers game. I'll show you soon. There's a number of publications out there. An estimated 40 to 80 million tons of prey are annually killed by global spider community. That's fine. And this is an updated perspective of that they are generous predators. They really eat everything. They can get in their webs, or those that don't form webs, they just basically go after them like crab spiders, wolf spiders, and ambush spiders. Okay. They are good in the ecosystem. It means a healthy ecosystem having spiders, but I would not rely on them to manage a pest population. They just don't eat enough, and it takes them a long time to just eat one or two prey. So now let's talk about the conservation biological control. These are two publications. This is the title Conservation Biological Control in the Home Landscape, and this is a functional overview of conservation biological control. This is what you need to do in the garden or landscape. Okay, so what is conservation biological control? It's one of the three. I talked about augmentation, classical. So conservation biocontrol is also referred to as habitat manipulation, using floral resources. So the floral resource serves as a shelter, nectar source, alternative prey, or pollen. That's mostly for the adults. And I talked about green lacewings, for example. They will feed on nectar for egg production. Okay, surfer fly adults, same thing. They feed on nectar as an energy source, pollen as a carbohydrate source. Okay, so conservation biocontrol is having floral resources for the adult stages of these beneficial insects. Okay, so a really true definition is a conservation biological control is a biological control practice that includes any activity designed to protect, attract, or maintain existing populations of the beneficial insects. That's why we don't recommend purchasing ladybird beetles or praying mantis. Just try to create an environment that's favorable for them in your ecosystem. So what you're doing is you're using plants that attract beneficial insects and provide a food source such as nectar and pollen for the adults. Okay. The larval stages are feeding on prey as their source of energy. Okay, but the adults eat nectar for energy and pollen for carbohydrates. Okay. So there are lots of plants that can attract natural enemy or retain them. Basically, they fall into two families. The chrysanthemum family is also called Asteraceae or Compositea, and the carrot family, Umbelliferae. You can see that dill and fennel are in the Umbelliferae family. Lots of composites, coneflower, coreopsis. I think no, not sweetwism, but there are others. But the dominant family, plant families, are Compositea or Asteraceae and the Umbelliferae. Okay, so Queen Anne's lace, which sometimes is an invasive plant, they think, is really good. Sweetalism is a good one. I'll talk about that. So this is not an exhaustive list. There are others out there, but these are the ones I really like. Echinacea, because echinacea not only is a food source for natural enemies, but butterflies visit it. That includes swallowtails, monarch butterflies, also bees, bumblebees, and honeybees will visit coneflowers. So you always have a garden of coneflowers. Okay. There are lots of publications out there, but here is a wild onion in bloom is very attractive to not only bees, but other beneficial insects that we talked about. Flowers, wild onion. Here are soldier beetles feeding on goldenrod, and of course this is very timely because goldenrod is going to be blooming. Soldier beetle adults are mating and basically feeding. I mean, insects are very efficient. They will have sex and eat at the same time. They don't waste time like humans do. But basically, this is coming up. Pretty soon you're going to see goldenrod and soldier beetles, which are predator, in this type of situation. Okay. This is an example of wild garlic. And what we have here are insects love to have sex, but no, this is a good mating location. This is a parasitoid of the green June beetle called Scalia dubia. This parasitoid lays eggs in the larva of green June beetles, which are out right now, and kill them. But it's using the pollen as a source of carbohydrates and nectar energy for eggland. Okay, so again, coming up, it'll be soon. You'll start seeing Scalia dubia not only feeding on wild garlic, but they also feed on goldenrod. So this scenario will be coming up pretty soon. That's actually probably right now. Okay, so that's a parasitoid, and the soldier beetle is a predator. So these plants not only provide nectar and pollen, but they serve as refugia and they provide mating sites. So there's, like I showed you in that one image, there's lots of functionality associated with many of these plants. Sweetalism is great for aphid parasitoids. It's one of the best ones. In fact, in California, in the Salinas Valley, they will intercrop rows of sweetalism along with lettuce. And that allows the parasitoids to move back and forth, attacking the lettuce aphid and coming back and getting the pollen nectar from the flower. So this plant is used in agriculture in California in the Salinas Valley. Well, I basically grew up. Okay. Two great books. I brought them. Christmas isn't far away. These make good Christmas presents. This is the first edition on the left and the newest edition second on the right. If you want more information about conservation biocontrol, these are the books I recommend getting. And you can look at them. Like I mentioned, I did bring both of them. They're not freebies, but there's the first edition. And then I recently picked up the second edition. Okay. Barnes and Noble still in business? Okay, if they are good, if they
Raymond
were,
bookstore in Lawrence.
was that?
Raymond bookstore.
Yeah, they pretty much anything, you can get them on Amazon, but I hate to make Jeff Bezos a super billionaire, but that's another issue. But really, if you want to plant a lot more plants, these books are gonna be something that you want for Christmas. In addition to the beneficial insects I've talked about, many of these plants will attract our pollinators. And here's Apis mellifera, the western honeybee, feeding on goldenrod flower. That's what you want to see. Again, looking for nectar as the energy source. And then monarch butterflies. And of course, monarchs are making their way back to Mexico, time of year. And this is a butterfly bush, which is another plant that will attract natural enemies, but it's serving as a food source for the adult as she's making her way back down to Mexico. Okay. Okay. So these plants have multiple functionalities about what they'll attract. Now, some of these will attract pests. You know, sometimes you'll get aphids on some of these plants. And that, the thing you want to do is you can't spray. You can use a forceful water spray, high pressure water spray to dislodge the aphids, and they won't come back. Okay, that's one of the problems. People that are rearing milkweed for monarch butterflies, there's the milkweed aphid, or it's also called the oleander aphid. It's that orange yellow aphid that gets on the plants. You can't spray, but you can dislodge them with the high pressure water spray. Okay, that's probably the easiest thing to do. The thing about pesticides is, I'm going to talk about this. If you're using pesticides, they can have either direct effect, killing the beneficials, or an indirect effect. Some of the residues will hang around. People talk about, well, what about insecticidal soaps and oils? They will kill they will kill all these insects we talked about on contact. They don't last long in the environment. If you spray a ladybird beetle with an insecticidal soap, you'll kill it. Okay, they're not discriminatory. They kill everything that they come in contact with. Okay, so when you're dealing with beneficial insects, you want to minimize the use of pesticides or use selective materials like dipel. Dipel is only going to kill caterpillars. So if you got imported cabbage worm, some of the tomato hornworms, that's what you want to use. Okay. You don't want to use broad spectrum materials because they will negatively impact directly the beneficial insects I've talked about and the pollinators. Okay. So this is the question. This is all good. Bring on the beneficials. Bring them on. I got a whole garden full of them. But are they managing the pest population? Well, in about 3 years ago, I investigated. I wrote a paper, an article. It was how effective is conservation biocontrol in regulating insect pest populations in organic crop production systems. So over here is a list of the flowering plants and the natural enemies that are attracted to them. And we talked about some of these hoverflies. Most of these are parasitoids. Well, what I found in the literature, this was a review, was that although incorporating flowering plants into organic crop production systems may increase the natural enemy assemblages, more robust scientific studies are warranted to determine the actual effects of natural enemies in reducing plant damage associated with insect pest populations. None of those papers talked about the impact on the insect pest populations. It was all attracting different beneficials. And so it's the story's not complete, but we are finding is just because you have lots of natural enemies, beneficial insects, doesn't mean you're going to manage the pest population. In fact, this really says it in a nutshell. This is in one of the publications I gave you. Moreover, an increase in beneficial insects does not always translate into a general decrease in pest species or an increase in yield. There it is. So just because you bring in lots of green lacewings, lots of parasitoids, that doesn't translate into a reduction in the numbers of insect pest populations. Why is that the case? Well, it's a numbers game. Many of the pest populations out there have high reproductive capacity. Aphids and two-spotted spider mites, they produce tremendous amounts of offspring that the natural enemies, beneficial insects cannot keep up with. Okay, so this is not restricted to these two, but others will do the same thing. But aphids and two-spotted spider mites are extremely, the females, reproductively prolific. Okay. In a greenhouse, aphids don't have to mate to reproduce. We call that parthenogenesis. So every one of those aphids, those nymphs, are genetic clones of the females, and they're already ready to lay eggs. They can lay about 100 eggs in 30 days. Okay, so if a female is kicking out 100 of these, you can do the math. Okay, it's a numbers game for the insects. How bad can it get? This is a really good example, and I don't even know the graduate student that did this, but in 5 generations, a single green peach aphid may give rise to 13 million individuals. Excuse my French, but that's a shitload of aphids. But you can see there are no beneficial insects that will keep up with that type of reproductive capacity. I don't know who the graduate student was. I don't know if it was Harrison, but he or she did not get paid enough. And that's doing, but you can see here are aphids on leaf, and there are not enough ladybird beetles that's going to eat all those, or parasitoids and attack all those aphids. Okay. So when you've got that, wow, there are no beneficial insects that are going to take care of that problem. This is recently in Manhattan. Producer called me, I went out there, zucchini, and I saw that, and she says, well, Ray, should I release ladybird beetles? And it says, no. Get rid of the plants and salvage what you can. It was beyond anything there. But there's no way that a natural biocontrol agent, beneficial insects, going to be able to manage that level of pest population. There's just no way. So it's a number game. So that means that you want to start early on, be proactive, get plants that are blooming year round, get the natural enemies. But again, that won't guarantee that you're going to not have this. Okay. That's the reality. It's good to have beneficial insects in an ecosystem because they will attack certain pest populations. And they're just part of the ecosystem. Okay. It's always good to have them. So this is the extension publication everybody can have. This has got some pictures. You've probably seen them in this talk. Talks about pollinators and beneficial insects. Okay. Before we get to the questions, when you're a scientist and you look at movies, you look at them very differently from everybody else. How many have seen the first Jurassic Park? How many are they on? About 12 or 13? I forget. Okay. Do you remember the scene where they're looking at the laboratory, the doctor's talking about dinosaurs, and you see eggs and stuff in there? Okay. My question is this. If all the dinosaurs are females and there's no unauthorized breeding, where did the eggs come from? Now, later on, he talks about frogs and the DNA and hermaphrodites, but if they're all female, where did the eggs come from? I think Steven Spielberg screwed up here. Does anybody have the answer? But again, so when you're a scientist watching a movie, you look at it differently than a lot of people, and that doesn't make it unfun. It just I looked at that and said, and this was like several years ago after like the third one came out, and I went back and seen it, and I go, wait a minute, okay, this doesn't make sense. So I just wanted to point that out. So whenever you see this movie, ask yourself that question: where did those eggs come from? So with that note, I want to thank you for attention. Hope you all learned something. That's all I had, and I would be happy to address any questions. So thank you very much. Yeah. Okay, questions? Yes, sir.
You mentioned, Echinacea, alyssum, goldenrod are the natives the only ones that are productive in that, or are other varieties of, for instance, coneflowers, like 30 of them on the market?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's not limited to natives. It's non-native species too.
And that's true for alyssum also,
Yes.
and also for goldenrod?
Yes,
So they will still attract insects even though they're not native to the area.
exactly.
Wow.
As long as they've got flowers that are going to contribute, that are going to produce pollen nectar, that the insects find attractive, the insects will use them.
And that's the same message that, Chip Savers tells to from KU. From the Monarch Watch.
Yeah, right.
The same.
The Asclepias, right? The natives and the non-natives will still serve as a food source for the larval stage of the monarch butterfly. Yeah, exactly, yeah. Although, we tend to look like tuberosa or some of those, but yeah, you look at the plethora of Asclepias, it doesn't matter. The monarch butterfly larva will feed on most Asclepia species or milkweed species. Yeah, it's true. Yes,
This may be a urban legend, I don't know, but lightning bugs, I know lightning bugs aren't lightning bugs and other deals. But I've heard in a couple different places that they're actually, they eat bad insect eggs, is that correct?
yeah, lightning bugs are predators. The larval stage is predators. The larval stage of the blister beetle, which is a pest, actually feeds on grasshopper eggs. But the lampreyts or the lightning bugs, they are themselves predators, yes.
Does all the urban lighting that we're starting to see around, is that affecting the lightning bug on other beetles again? Does
Yeah.
that affect the?
Well,
population at all?
Well, I'm not aware of any studies that have shown that artificial lighting has impacted, because I sit in my deck in my backyard and at night, and I see lightning bugs. When I would visit my dad's father in Bolivar, Missouri, or halfway, which is between Buffalo and Bolivar, on the 40-acre farm, that's why I started liking insects. I'd go out there, I'd collect them, I'd come back with chigger bites, but it was funny. But basically, my not indoctrination, we would see lightning bugs all over the place. Yeah. So, but the artificial lighting system can impact the beneficials by disrupting phenology of certain plants that are if you have too much artificial lighting, it can basically foul up the phenology, and that would be problematic. From a lightning bug standpoint, I'm not aware of any studies, and we used to have the person in Western Kansas, Guard City, do a lot of work with lightning bugs, and I never heard him talk about it.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious about the Chinese praying mantises. I've heard that they are invasive, something that a population that should be encouraged or discouraged. Versus
The Carolina and Chinese are endemic, or cosmopolitan, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Mhm. As far as I understand, not just Kansas, but the United States.
Okay,
Right.
so there's really nothing to do about, I mean, so the Chinese ones are not problematic
No,
in any way.
No,
Compared
no.
to the others.
no, I mean, they are part of the ecosystem, and they're very generalist being everything, but in terms of, can you do anything about it? No, it's like the Asian jumping worm. It's here. You can't do anything about it. Most of our pest problems are non-native,
Right.
really. And so, and when that happens, it takes a long time for our endemic, our cosmopolitan native populations to build up, and sometimes they just don't regulate or manage the pest populations as such, yeah. But the praying mantids, there are other praying mantids, but the dominant ones that we deal with are the Carolina and the China. You have a question? Did you have any questions?
You kind of answered, I just, we were talking about, pests, species and good bugs, and I said, is there ever good bugs that kind of are good, sort of in a narrow window, but when they can be bad? That could be kind of answer that.
Well, that's a good question. I think, when we look at good bugs as being good, define good, in this case, we're talking about eating the bad insects. Well, let me give you an example of a problem. The Asian ladybird beetle, which is brought in the 80s to deal with pecan aphid, didn't come in with its own natural enemies, so it basically exploded. And it's a great predator for soybean aphid, but the problem is in the fall when it comes into your house.
Right.
So in one aspect, it's a good insect. And the other aspect, it's a nuisance insect, okay? And the same with the brown, now the other insects that are out there, they may appear to be good, but on the other hand, they may have some baggage behind them. I mean, honeybees are good, but when they make a nest in your garage or in the wall voids, that's not good. Although you can call a beekeeper to remove it. But yeah, we have the cases, and we have cases where, you know, especially ones we brought in, we thought they were good, but we didn't take everything into consideration, and they turned out to escape. Yeah. Yeah.
Doug Talby talks a lot about attracting caterpillars, particularly with certain varieties of plants like oak trees, for instance. Is that problematic in terms of insects knocking off the caterpillars? He's talking about wanting a wide diversity of insects, and oak trees are going to attract, like I think he said, over 900 different species of caterpillars. Are we going to, or is that one end of the spectrum, and the other end of the spectrum is try to kill caterpillars who become predators later on? How do you think about that?
Well, that's a very broad, vague term. That I know, Doug. But the thing about, you know, oaks, remember, your caterpillars are herbivores. They're going to eat plant material. There's really no beneficial caterpillar, other than, you know, even the monarch butterfly will feed on milkweed, but it's an iconic insect. But, you know, when you look at the caterpillars that are out there, and several feed on oaks, they're defoliating, and that's going to be detrimental to the tree. So it's really not beneficial. You want a diversity, but I wouldn't want a diversity of caterpillars, because the caterpillars are acting as herbivores.
Well, his message, I think, in part is that they feed birds. I mean, birds are after caterpillars all the time. And so if you have a large bird
Depending on
population-
species, they're not going to be after the monarch butterfly. Yeah.
Right.
Right. I mean, you have to look at the situation. You know, there are caterpillars that are really aggressive pests, and those that are like, will eat a little bit overall. But if I was wanting diversity, I'd want more than just caterpillars. I'd want sawflies and other insects. So you have this good, bad interaction occurring, and you have natural regulation control going on in there. Most of your oak trees, the large oaks, whether it be pin or swamp, I mean, they can sustain some damage, and they'll come back. You know, there's just so much canopy, and a caterpillar or a sawfly or other insect can't really eat enough foliage to damage them or set them back. Yeah, thanks. But no, if you're thinking of beneficial insects, you know, they're also eaten by birds too, or vertebrates, toads, lizards, frogs, things like that. So it's part of this overall ecosystem, and that's why there's this numbers game, because the insects know that there'll be natural mortality from just dying, there'll be mortality from predators, and there'll be mortality from weather conditions, whether it be too cold or too hot, rain, things like that.
So the diversity is still important, getting as many different kinds of things as you can, attracting different kinds of insects to your garden.
Well, yes, diversity is critical, especially in plants, because if you have like one insect come in and you got monoculture, you look like emerald ash borer, you've got green ash, you're wiped out. So you want genetic and species diversity. So if you lose a hackberry, you've got pines and you've got oaks and other trees that'll be there still.
Right.
That's really important from the plant aspect. From insect standpoint, you do want diversity, and that's why conservation biocontrol gives you that, because you're going to have all flowering plants, and you'll have some of these beneficial insects who won't do a darn thing, but some will. But as Rachel Carson says, there's the balance of nature, and so there's a reason why there's mosquitoes, there's a reason why there's fleas, but they're part of the ecosystem, they're part of that food chain. And so in my own mindset, I like gardens and landscapes with the diversity of both good and bad. So, yeah. Yes, Steve?
Odd question is, when I saw the picture of the spider mite you had up there, I thought of chiggers, because they look a lot like that. It's how hard is it to differentiate if they look hard between a spider mite and a trigger?
Oh, easy. Spider mites and chiggers morphologically are very distinct. Yeah, chiggers are deep red, and they're much smaller than two-spotted spider mite. As an entomologist, as an entomologist, see, I can tell the difference very quickly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
One last question.
No, go ahead. This is what we're here for.
Is there a difference between traditional mites, spider mites and boxwood mites? Just like, is there a difference between sawflies that are generic sawflies and hibiscus sawflies? I hear an adjective in front of the insect and wondering, are they really different, or is it just that they're attacking a particular plant that I'm interested in?
Okay, so let me, so there are insects, and this is where common names become a problem. There are insects that are specialists. So, for example, is the monarch butterfly larva. Probably, all they feed upon is on milkweed. You won't see them feeding on anything else. So there are insects that will feed only on hibiscus, and they get this common name, the hibiscus sawfly. But the common names, like everything else, they're kind of misnomers. But it might feed on some other plant or a relative of the hibiscus family, which is basically the Malabaceae family, the cotton family. So we will have insects that will feed in the same family. Like, for example, Colorado potato beetle. They feed on plants in the Solanaceae family. That's the eggplant, tomato, pepper, and egg. What's the other one? Tomato, pepper, eggplant. There's a fourth one. Come on, Ray. So you've got eggplants, tomato, pepper, they're specialists for that group of plants because they've evolved with the chemistry of those plants. And then you've got other insects that will feed on 4 or 5 different families. Those are generals. They have not evolved. They have not evolved to be specific for chemistry for those plants. Okay, so they'll attack a wide variety.
Even though they're called the same thing without the,
Yes.
like an aphid, I've never heard of a peach aphid you mentioned earlier.
Green peach aphid, yeah.
That's different than other aphids.
Oh, yeah, the green peach aphid, Mysis persica, is different from all other aphids, or woolly apple aphid, or rose aphid. Those are all different species. Okay, so the rose aphid feeds only on roses, where the green peach aphid feeds on a wide variety of ornamentals and also vegetable plants.
So, okay, last question then is, are the predators of those aphids, for instance, universal? Will they eat any aphid, or is it special diet for them also?
Okay, that's a great question. Predators like ladybird beetles and green lacewings, they will eat a diversity of aphids. The parasitoids are very specialist. You'll have parasitoids that only attack the green peach aphid, and there were some that only attack the rose aphids. That's why parasitoids are specialists. They'll only attack one stage or one type. The generalists, like the ladybird beetles, the green lacewings, and hoverfly larvae, they will feed on wide diversity of genera and species of aphids. Yeah. No, those are great. That's great questions. Yeah. Yes, sir.
How close do beneficial plants have to be, or like host plants have to be to attract beneficials? Is it interplanted in a row, or is it within 10, 15 feet, or does that make sense?
It kind of, you really want to have like batches of these plants, not really rows, but just clumps to attract them, and with different plant material in them. Yeah. And, just create the patches, and it's like you build it and they will come. You'll fill the niches. You put them in there, the insects will find them. But you want to have multiple batches in an area, not just one small one, because it'll take a while for the insects to find them.
Would those patches need to be like next to the tomatoes, or are they good enough if they're within the general vicinity, or do they need to be like tomato, beneficial, tomato?
Oh, you're talking about in amongst the crop?
Yes.
Yeah. No, it could be, you could interplant it in rows, or have the patches, like some people with community garden, they'll have a clump of zinnias here at the very start, and then a clump of marigolds somewhere else, or they'll have roses. So it really is variable. There really is no hard and fast rules on that. And that's why the books will help you, but just walk among a community garden, and you'll see how people vary and how they put their plants they think are going to be beneficial. I wouldn't use marigolds because they attract thrips and spider mites. I'd probably use something else if they're going to use it as either a trap plant or a plant to attract natural enemies. Yeah.
Marigolds attract spider mites.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. We used to use that. We used to use it when we were doing spider mite work. many years ago, that was our crop. We would use spider mite marigolds for all our spider mite trials.
Okay.
Yeah, two-spotted spider mite, yeah.
Good.
You know, it'll also draw in thrips, especially when it's in flower. It's a beautiful plant, but it's not one that I would use to track natural enemies. I would probably use another compositea like coneflower or black-eyed Susan or something like that.
I had a question. So on the monarch butterfly, I guess what I had read when I was designing gardens for that habitat was that they are what's called an obligate feeder of the milkweeds, which means they are obligated to eat it, basically because it makes their larvae poisonous to birds. Is that correct?
That is correct. Let's go through that. So, the milkweed produces what we call cardinalides, glycosides, and the monarch butterfly larva, they will eat that, sequester it, and when they become an adult, they're poisonous. That's so, and that's just not monarch. Other insects will actually, tomato hornworms, tobacco hornworms, they will sequester poisons that the plant produces for their own benefit, to make them toxic to predators, so then they can continue to survive. Now, this is the thing to remember, though. And this is where I tell people, you've got to keep the milkweed aphids off the milkweeds, because what studies have shown is if there are high numbers of milkweed aphids or oleander aphids on the milkweed, the plant does not produce adequate amounts of cardinalides or glycosides for the monarch butterfly larva. So what happens is if a monarch butterfly larva eats or is feeding on a milkweed with lots of aphids, when they become adult, they're not going to be toxic and the birds will eat them. So that's why we tell people, you've got to keep those milkweeds off those milkweed aphids off the milkweeds, because you want to make sure that the plant is producing enough cardinalides for the monarch butterfly to sequester, and then when they become adults, they will be poisonous.
I'm afraid to ask this question. So
Okay, this is the last one.
Fine, we're having so much fun, aren't we?
So all the people who plant marigolds buy a variety of plants that produce products for like peppers or tomatoes or wasting the time.
That's a good point. And, you know, there's all these terms, well, I think you're referring to companion plant. Or
Yes.
companion planting, and that definition's been really worked on, is putting plants on another plant to make it grow better or better. Now, there is another term called trap plant, is that's when you're putting plants around strawberries, and you want the pest to attack that trap plant so they don't attack the strawberries. That is useful in some cases, as long as you understand the trap plants have to be maintained, and you've got to make sure that you kill the insects on the trap plants before they move on your main crop.
Okay.
That's another topic is, you know, the trap plants, the companion planting, the intercropping, those are very loose terms, but they do have general definitions if they're used correctly. Yeah, so, but the thing about companion planting, there are very few, if any, studies that show that actually works. I have a whole folder on it, and you go through there and the studies have shown really the companion planting doesn't even work. In fact, there's several books, Roses Love Garlic, and there's another one, and none of that has been supported by scientific information. Yeah, Roses Love Garlic, and there's another one, there's a second one I didn't remember, but companion planting, very little robust scientific data to support that it actually works. Any other questions? This is great. Did you learn something? You have fun? I want to thank Steve for inviting me.
Thanks again for coming.
Oh, absolutely, anytime, yeah, this is great. So if you have, everybody has a handout, you can grab the handouts. Look at the Riker mounts. I did bring some other publications that you can take pictures of. I did bring the Riker mounts of the wheel bug and praying mantids and some other things. You can just go ahead. I'll stay around and you can just look at those too. Yeah. And the evaluations, if you want to just leave my here. If this was the worst presentation you ever heard, those go in that container right there. But I do appreciate your attendance, and I